The six-eyed creature sinks its teeth into his throat, the crunch of vertebrae. Darkness. And then the cold hits his back again, and Do-hyun opens his eyes, safe and sound. The same ground, the same scent of pine needles, the same creature rustling in the bushes. Only now he remembers exactly how it jumps. But let's take a step back. Do-hyun opens his eyes and sees two moons above him, one white, one pale red. They hang so close they look like a pair of eyes staring right at him. He's lying on the frozen ground. It smells of pine needles and something burnt. The last thing he remembers is the wet staircase in the office, a slippery step, his temple hitting the step, the crack of his own skull, and a stupid thought. Seriously, just like that, at a meeting that wasn't even important. And now, 2 moons. Do-hyun sits down. He feels himself over like an engineer checking equipment after an accident. His fingers bend, his neck turns, everything works. But this isn't a hospital, not a morgue. An unfamiliar forest. The trunks are black, the leaves are silvery like foil, and somewhere far away, a sound is born. A low, drawn-out howl that makes the air vibrate. Do-hyun doesn't run. He freezes and counts. 1 second. 2. 3. The howl repeats. Closer. The engineer inside says a simple thing. When the system behaves strangely, you gather data. Don't panic. Gather data. Something emerges from the bushes. 6 eyes. A mouth stretching to its ears. Saliva hangs down to the ground in long strands. The size of a large dog, but it moves like a cat. Silently and softly. Do-hyun doesn't even have time to step back. The creature leaps from its hind legs. A blur, a blow to the neck. And nothing. Darkness. Absolute, complete silence. And in that silence, for a split second, he senses another presence. Not a sound, more of a feeling, as if the silence itself were alive and watching him. Then the cold hits his back again. 2 moons, the same earth, the same smell. Do-hyun grabs his neck. It's intact. His skin is smooth, not a scratch. But he remembers. He remembers everything. The heat of the creature's breath, the angle at which it jumped, how its teeth sank into his flesh, the pain, and the crunch of his own vertebrae. He sits on the frozen ground and breathes. His hands are shaking, not from the cold. His brain is trying right now to reconcile 2 facts. First, he died. Second, he's alive. The engineer is silent for exactly 4 seconds. Then he quietly utters a single thought. It's not a bug. It's a tool. Do-hyun stands up. He looks toward the bushes. The creature is there. The same rustling, the same rhythm. The scene has restarted. And this is where the most important part begins. The creature jumps. Last time it stood still. Now it falls to the ground a second before the jump. Claws scrape through the air a centimeter from his face. The smell of rotten meat. The creature lands and turns, too fast. A second jump. Do-hyun rolls back but doesn't make it in time. Claws sink into his ribs, a white flash of pain. He screams. The creature tears him apart. Darkness again. That living silence again. The cold down his spine again. 2 moons. Do-hyun sits down. His ribs are intact. He remembers both deaths. The pain of the first is already fading but won't go away. It settles somewhere at the bottom like sediment. and the second one settles on top of it, fresh and hot. He pulls a pencil stub out of his pocket, finds a flat stone, and scratches. Death number 1. A leap from his hind legs, a distance of 3 meters, aiming for the throat. Death number 2. The creature turns around a second after the miss, a second leap, lower, aiming for the torso. Conclusion. Don't retreat. The retreat is slow. Jump to the side. He stands up. The creature rustles in the bushes again. Same rhythm, same sequence. Du-hyun retreats to a thick tree and presses his back against the trunk. The creature jumps. He steps to the side. The creature crashes into the trunk, a dull thud, a screech. Half a second of stunned silence. Do-hyun runs. Not heroism, not a fight, a tactical retreat. He races through the forest under 2 moons and counts his steps. On the 120th, he runs out onto a cliff. Below lies the valley. Red lights, campfires, a village. He descends the slope. Rocks crumble beneath his feet. Halfway down, the howl is behind him, far away. The creature isn't pursuing him. So it has a territory. So it only hunts within its own zone. He memorizes it. Every detail settles in his mind not as a memory, but as a line in a technical report. The village is small, a dozen houses, a palisade of sharpened logs. The gate is closed. Do-hyun knocks. No one opens it for a long time. Then a gate creaks and a face peeks through the crack. An old man, wrinkles like cracks in dry clay. His eyes are wary. The old man asks who he is and where he's from. Du-hyun replies that he got lost and that a creature with 6 eyes attacked him in the forest up above. The old man turns pale. He calls the creature a jumper. He says that jumpers never leave anyone alive. He asks how Du-hyun survived. Du-hyun thinks for a second. Then he says he was lucky. The old man doesn't believe him, but he opens the gate. Inside, it smells of smoke and cooked meat. People peer out the windows. A woman by the well freezes with a bucket in her hand. Children are hiding behind the fence. Du-hyun is a stranger. Strange clothes, strange language. And here's the second oddity. He speaks their language even though he never learned it. The words are just there in his head, as if someone had uploaded a file while he was lying dead. One more line for the report. The old man's name is Baron. He is the village elder of Thornford. That is the name of the village. Baron leads him to the fire and gives him a bowl of soup. Du-hyun eats and listens. Baron talks about the crimson wastes to the south, about the lowlands with their poisonous fog to the west, about the creatures from the other side that crawl through the rifts, and about the largest rift in the north, the Rift of Silence. At these words, Baron lowers his voice. Do-hyun asks what it is. Baron replies that it is a crack from which no one returns. In 12 years, 8 expeditions have gone there. No one has returned. They didn't even find the bodies. Do-hyun recalls that silence between deaths, a living intent. And he remembers that too. Baron gives him a blanket and a spot by the barn wall. Do-hyun lies down and closes his eyes. Sleep won't come. Every time he feels the jumper's teeth on his neck, claws in his ribs, a crunch. The pain is no longer sharp, but dull and heavy, like a stone in his chest. Twice. He died twice in a single evening, and he remembers every second. He lies beneath unfamiliar stars and thinks, if this is a tool, then it comes with instructions. The instructions need to be written down. He needs a notebook. He needs a system. He needs order. chaos kills. Order allows chaos to kill you in a controlled way. Im Do-hyun closes his eyes and, for the first time tonight, almost smiles. Almost. Because deep inside his body, the memory of the pain still lives on. And he knows. This is only the beginning. Morning in Ternovi Brod began with a rooster's crow. Only here the rooster crowed 2 tones lower than on Earth and sounded like a broken siren. Do-hyun woke up against the barn wall with a stiff back, and the first thing he did was feel his neck. Intact. Ribs? Intact. A reflex he no longer come to hate. He stood up and looked around. In the daylight, the village looked poor but sturdy. Houses made of gray stone. Roofs made of something resembling slate. A 3-meter-high palisade. People were already moving about. A woman was carrying buckets. A man was sharpening a knife on his doorstep. 2 boys were dragging a bundle of firewood. Everyone was eyeing Do-hyun. He was an outsider in his office shirt and pants. The first thing he needed was a notebook. He found Baron by the well and asked if there was any paper in the village. Baron looked at him as if he were crazy. Paper was expensive. They brought it in from the city once a season. Do-hyun asked what the... Baron showed him a board made of bleached wood and a piece of charcoal. They write little. They read even less. Do-hyun took the board and the charcoal. He sat down by the barn and began to write. The jumper. 6 eyes, the size of a large dog. Jumps from its hind legs. Attack range 3 meters. Reaction time after a miss is 1 second. Stunned upon impact with a hard surface. Stun duration is half a second. Territorial. Does not pursue outside the zone. The zone is approximately 120 paces from the forest to the cliff. A woman stopped nearby and looked at his notes. Young, dark hair tied in a bun, hands red from work. Her apron was stained with herbs. She asked what he was writing. Do-hyun replied that he was compiling a report on the creature that had tried to kill him. She snorted. She said that jumpers kill, they don't just try. She said that if he'd encountered a jumper and survived, then he was either lying or insane. Do-hyun looked at her and asked what her name. So-yuna. She was an herbalist, the only healer in the whole village. Do-hyun asked what people in Thornford died from most often. So-yuna fell silent. Then she replied dryly, From everything. From jumpers. From the poisonous fog when the wind blows from the west. From swamp fever. From the bites of the creatures in Howling Ravine. From the fact that no one knows how to fight half of what kills them. She said this without drama, like a weather report. Do-hyun understood. Death here was not a tragedy, but a backdrop, a statistic. He asked about Howling Ravine. Yuna pursed her lips. She said the ravine was half a league to the east. 11 people had died there in 20 years. The last was the brother of the hunter Torin 3 years ago. The ravine was considered cursed. They gave it a wide berth. No one went there voluntarily. Do-hyun wrote it on the board. Howling Ravine. 11 deaths in 20 years. A curse or an unknown danger? Reconnaissance required. Yuna looked at the note and asked what kind of reconnaissance. Do-hyun replied that he would go there and take a look. Yuna said he was definitely crazy. Do-hyun didn't argue. Instead, he spent the day surveying the village. He walked along the palisade and inspected the logs. 3 of them were rotten. He found gaps at the base of the wall through which a small creature could squeeze. He asked Baron when the fence had last been repaired. Baron replied that it had been 2 years ago. No people, no hands. Everyone was busy surviving. Do-hyun asked for tools. Baron gave him an axe and a rope. By evening, Do-hyun had replaced one rotten log and plugged 2 gaps with stones and clay. The work was simple. His hands remembered. At the factory, he had repaired more complicated things. By evening, a man with a stern face and a scar across his left eyebrow approached him. Torin, a hunter, the very one whose brother had died in Howling Ravine. Torin asked if it was true that Do-hyun was heading to the ravine. Do-hyun replied that it was. Torin said it was suicide. Do-hyun remained silent. Torin looked at him long and hard. Then he said that if Do-hyun wanted to die, that was his business, but he shouldn't lie to people and say he'd come back. Do-hyun replied that he would come back. Torin left. That night, Do-hyun lay by the barn and counted. 2 days in this world, 2 deaths, 1 village, 1 ravine that everyone fears. 11 dead for whom no one had sought revenge, because there is no one to avenge when you don't know what killed you. He thought of Yoon and her red hands, about Torin and his dead brother, about Baron, who opened the gate to a stranger because every person in the village counts. These people weren't cowards. They were cautious. In a world where a second chance isn't possible, caution is the only strategy. But he had a second chance, and a third, and 100th. He could afford what no one else could, to make mistakes. In the morning, he got up before dawn. He took a board and some charcoal, the knife Baron had given him, a piece of rope, a flask of water. Yuna stood by the well and watched him get ready. She asked where he was going. He replied that he was going to Howling Ravine. She said he would die there. He replied that perhaps he would. She asked why he was going then. He paused for a second. Then he said he wanted to find out why people die there. Yuna didn't answer. She watched his back as he walked toward the gate. Torin was standing at the village exit. He silently handed Do-hyun a short hunting bow and 3 arrows. He said his brother had gone with a sword, and it hadn't helped him. Maybe the distance would at least help. Do-hyun took the bow. He thanked him. Torin turned away. Do-hyun walked toward the ravine for half an hour. The path was overgrown. It was clear that it hadn't been used in a long time. The last person to walk here was Torin's brother 3 years ago. The Howling Ravine opened up suddenly. The ground simply ended and a drop-off began, about 10 meters deep. Walls of gray, porous stone. Karst. Do-hyun recognized the rock. He had worked with karst soils at the factory, a structure prone to collapse, voids inside, unpredictable sinkholes. He began his descent down the ravine wall. At the 3-meter mark, the rock crumbled beneath his foot, and he fell. A thud, pain in his ankle, no fracture, a sprain. He stood up and looked around. The bottom of the ravine was narrow, about 2 meters wide. Walls rose on both sides. Ahead, the passage led deeper and turned. He took 5 steps. On the 6th, something whistled from the left, a blow to the temple. Darkness. Silence. That very one. Alive. For a split second, the sensation of a stranger's gaze, then a chill down his spine. 2 moons. A barn. He was lying against the wall again. Night. The village slept. He sat up and clutched his temple. Unharmed. Death number 3. Attack from the left, a blow to the head, instantaneous speed. Didn't see what struck him. Trigger. 6 steps from the entrance. He stood up, waited until morning. At dawn, he went back to the ravine. Yuna was standing by the well again. She looked at him strangely, as if she wanted to say something but didn't. He walked past her. The ravine. The descent. This time he went down more carefully, didn't fall, entered the passage, counted his steps, stopped at the 5th, pressed himself against the right wall. 6th step. Nothing. He waited 10 seconds. Then he realized the attack was coming from the left. He was standing on the right. The creature was striking from the left wall. So if he pressed himself against the right wall, the creature wouldn't reach him. He took the 7th step, the 8th. On the 10th, the creature jumped from above, from the ceiling, not from the left, from above. He caught a glimpse of it for a split second. Small, the size of a cat, long paws, no eyes. It was guided by sound, his footsteps. Death number 4. An attack from the ceiling. The trigger, the 10th step. The creature is blind. It hunts by the sound of footsteps. He returned again. The moon, a bar, night. The pain of 2 new deaths lay on top of the old ones. 4 layers, 4 agonies, each unique, each remembered in detail. He lay there, breathing through clenched teeth until his body stopped trembling. Then he took a board and wrote it down. The 5th morning in Turnovibrod. Do-hyun was walking toward the ravine. Yuna was no longer standing by the well. She was sitting on the porch of her house, silently watching him pass by. On the 3rd day, she stopped asking where he was going. On the 4th, she stopped telling him he would die. Now, she just watched. There was something new in her eyes. Not fear, not irritation. Something like the professional interest of a doctor observing a disease he cannot explain. Do-hyun was walking toward the ravine for the 6th time. In 3 days, he had died there 5 more times. Each death gave him a new piece of information. There wasn't just one creature in the ravine, but a pack. 7 of them. All blind. All relied on sound to navigate. But they didn't react to just any sound, only to a specific rhythm of footsteps. A steady pace with uniform intervals triggered an attack instantly. He realized this on death number 6, when he took 10 steps at a steady pace and was attacked by 3 jumpers from 3 sides at once. But when he paused for 15 seconds between steps, the jumpers froze. They waited. They listened. On death number 8, he realized something else. The jumpers didn't attack just based on sound, but on a repeating pattern. If he walked unevenly, step, pause, 2 steps, long pause, step, they got confused. One jumper lunged toward him and missed by a meter. They couldn't pinpoint his position if the rhythm was unpredictable. At death number 9, he went deeper than ever before. 30 steps into the ravine. There, the passage widened. The ceiling rose. The jumpers here were larger. One of them clawed him across the back. A long gash from his shoulder blade to his lower back. He fell, and as he was dying, he managed to see something important. A nest. In the widening of the passage, a mass of saliva and stone hung from the ceiling. Small bodies moved inside, young. The pack was defending the nest. This isn't a curse. This is nesting territory. Death number 9 was a long one. He bled out for about 3 minutes. During those 3 minutes, he lay face up and counted the jumpers on the ceiling. 7 adults, about 10 young, 1 nest, tied to a specific widening at the 30th step. After this death, he lay by the barn longer than usual. He didn't record it. He just lay there and waited until he stopped feeling the phantom cut on his back. The body was intact, but his nerves remembered. His muscles remembered. He caught himself afraid to touch his own back. 9 deaths, each recorded, each inside, layer upon layer. The engineer inside him worked flawlessly. The man inside him was beginning to crack. In the morning, he went again. This time, not to the ravine. He went to Torin. The hunter was sitting by his house, sharpening arrowheads. Du-hyun sat down beside him and said he knew what had killed his brother. Torin froze. Du-hyun described the jumpers. Blind. They hunt by the sound of footsteps. They react to a steady rhythm. His brother had most likely been walking with the confident, steady stride of an experienced hunter. That was exactly what killed him. The jumpers take a steady step as a sign of prey. Torin listened without interrupting. His face remained unchanged. Only the knuckles of his fingers turned white on the arrow shaft. When Du-hyun fell silent, Torin asked how he knew this. Du-hyun replied that he had checked. Torin asked how one could check and stay alive. Du-hyun didn't answer. Torin looked at him for a long time. Then he asked quietly, "How many times?" Du-hyun said it didn't matter. Torin said it did matter. Du-hyun paused. Then he answered, 9. Torin didn't understand, or perhaps he did but couldn't accept it. He stood up and went inside. Du-hyun remained seated. He hadn't expected Torin to believe him, not yet anyway, but the data had been collected. All that remained was to conduct one final test. On the 10th attempt, Du-hyun entered the ravine with a plan. He moved according to the pattern: 1 step on the count of 1, pause, 2 steps in a row, long pause, step. The jumpers twitched but didn't attack. Their echolocation couldn't lock onto a target with an unpredictable rhythm. He reached the widening. He pressed himself against the left wall. There was a blind spot here. The jumpers on the ceiling relied on sound from below, but the sound bounced off the left wall and created an echo. They couldn't pinpoint his exact position. He stood a meter from the nest, and the jumpers sat on the ceiling, turning their eyeless heads. He walked past the nest. Beyond the widening, the passage continued for another 20 steps. Then the exit. Light. Du-hyun emerged on the other side of the ravine, alive, for the first time in 10 attempts. He stood at the edge of the ravine and breathed. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from relief. The engineer inside him wrote down the last line. The safe route through Howling Ravine. The entrance. A step on the count of 1 and 2 with irregular pauses. The left wall in the widened section. Crouch on the 30th step. Don't run. Don't stop for long. Return via the same route. 10 deaths, 10 agonies etched into his body, and one diagram that was worth them all. He returned to the village through the main gate. Yuna saw him first. She was standing by her house sorting through herbs. When she looked up and saw him alive, something flinched in her face. She quickly turned away. Du-hyun walked over to the bonfire in the square. He sat down. He picked up a stick and began to draw on the ground. A diagram of the ravine, the passage, the widening, the nest, the jumpers' positions, the route. Baren was the first to approach. Then the others gathered around. Torin stood to the side and watched. Du-hyun explained. The ravine isn't cursed. It's a karst cave with unstable walls and a nest of blind predators. They hunt by sound. A steady step is like a dinner bell to them. But if you walk like this, and he demonstrated the rhythm, step, pause, 2 steps, pause. If you stick to the left wall in the widening section, if you crouch on the 30th step, the jumper will fly over your head. Silence. People looked at the diagram. Baren asked how he knew this. Du-hyun didn't look up. He said he'd been there several times. Baren asked how many times. Hyun replied that it was enough. Torin stepped forward. His face was stony. He looked at the diagram. He looked at Do-hyun. Then he spoke a single sentence. He said that his brother had walked into the ravine with an even stride, always steady, just as their father had taught them. Do-hyun nodded. Torin stood there, looking at the route that could have saved his brother if someone had drawn it 3 years earlier. Then Torin sat down next to Do-hyun, silently. It was neither forgiveness nor gratitude. It was acknowledgement. Yuna was the last to approach. She looked at the hymn and asked quietly, "You were dying out there." It wasn't a question. Do-hyun didn't answer. Yuna sat across from him and looked at him for a long time. Then she said his hands were shaking. Do-hyun looked at his palms. She was right. A slight, continuous tremor. He hadn't noticed. Yuna stood up and left. 5 minutes later, she returned with a mug, a hot brew made from something bitter. She said it was for the tremors. He drank it. The tremors didn't stop, but the brew was hot, and it was the first thing anyone had done for him in this world, not out of obligation, but out of care. Do-hyun sat by the fire and drank the bitter brew, and for the first time people gathered around him who looked at him not as a stranger, but as a man who had brought something valuable. Knowledge. Ayrton's most precious currency. Bought at the highest price. After the incident with the ravine, Do-hyun ceased to be a stranger. He became a curiosity, but a useful one. Baron set aside a corner of the barn for him, not out of generosity, out of calculation. A man who brings knowledge is more valuable than a man who brings firewood. Do-hyun didn't object. The barn was dry and warm, and most importantly, quiet. He sat there at night and wrote on wooden boards with a charcoal pencil. By the end of the first week, he had 6 boards filled with notes. Forest hoppers, cave hoppers, karst soil, poisonous fog, frequency and direction of the west wind, schedule of lunar phases and their effect on the creature's activity. He deduced the last one by chance. He noticed that on the night when the red moon was full, the hoppers in the forest howled more often. Hypothesis needs verification. Verification means another death, or several. He wrote it down and set the board aside. On the 9th day, Yuna came to him. She brought a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside was a real notebook, a small one, 30 pages, a cover made of coarse leather. The paper was gray and thick as cardboard. Yuna said she'd traded for it with a merchant who'd stopped by from Copper Outpost. She'd given him 3 vials of mint infusion. That was a week's worth of her work. Do-hyun looked at the notebook and didn't know what to say. Yuna snorted and said not to make that face. She said his wooden boards were taking up half the barn and that Baron was complaining. Do-hyun took the notebook. The pages smelled of grease and something herbal. He began copying the entries from the boards in small, neat handwriting. Each page became a report. Creature, attack type, speed, weak points, aggression triggers, ways to bypass them. He worked all day. Yuna came in twice. The first time she brought food. The second time, she just stood in the doorway and watched him write. Then she asked why he was writing everything down in such detail. Do-hyun answered without looking up from his notebook. He said that knowledge that isn't written down dies along with the one who carries it. And here, knowledge dies constantly. Because those who learn something about the creatures usually learn it at the moment of their death, and they take it with them. Yuna was silent for a long time. Then she said that was true. She said she herself had lost 3 patients to a swamp creature's bite and still didn't know what its venom looked like in the early stages. because all three had died too quickly. Do-hyun stopped writing. He looked at her. He asked what a swamp monster was. Yuna described it. A creature from Nizin. It looks like a toad the size of a barrel. It lives in stagnant water. It bites and injects venom. The poison takes effect in an hour. No symptoms for the first 40 minutes. Then, convulsions and death within 20 minutes. No known antidote. No one has survived long enough to describe the stages of poisoning. Do-hyun wrote it down. Swamp toad. Toad-like. Delayed action venom. 40 minutes without symptoms. 20 minutes from convulsions to death. No known antidote. He closed his notebook and said he needed to find a swamp dweller. Yuna said no, sharply and firmly. She said the swamps were 2 days' journey away and that he was out of his mind. Do-hyun replied that he wasn't right now. First, he needed to deal with the immediate threats, the ravine, the forest jumpers, the western mist, then the swamp dwellers. Yuna looked at him, and there was anger in her eyes. But not at him, at the situation, at a world where the only way to find out how a poison works is to let it kill you. She left without saying goodbye. Do-hyun went back to his notes. Something else happened that same day. A girl approached the barn. Small, about 17, skinny. Her hair was short and uneven, as if she'd cut it herself with a knife. Her clothes didn't belong to her. Not a villager. A worn-out traveling cloak, boots worn through to the soles. She stood in the barn doorway and looked at Do-hyun. He asked who she was. She said her name was Maggie, that she had come from Copper Outpost, that she'd heard about the man who'd crossed Howling Ravine and mapped it, and that she wanted to be his apprentice. Do-hyun looked at her. Thin, hungry, eyes huge and wary, the eyes of a child who was used to being chased. He asked how old she was. 17. He asked where her family was. No family. He asked if she knew how to do anything. Maggie straightened up. She said she knew how to steal, run, hide, and not die. She said the last part with such pride, as if it were her greatest achievement. And in this world, Do-hyun thought, perhaps that was exactly the case. He said he didn't take apprentices. Maggie said she wouldn't leave. He said she'd be better off finding a proper master, in the guild. She said the guilds charge money for training. She has no money, and the guilds don't take orphans. Do-hyun looked at her and saw something familiar. A stubbornness born not of strength, but of a lack of choice. When there's nowhere to go, and the only option is to stand still and not budge. He said she could stay in the village. Ba-den wouldn't chase her away if she worked. He'd think about the apprenticeship. Maggie nodded. She didn't smile, but the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She sat down by the barn door and didn't leave until nightfall. Do-hyun wrote. Maggie sat, in silence. Two people in the barn who, for some reason, didn't get in each other's way. At night, Do-hyun lay there and thought. 9 days, 12 deaths, 1 notebook, 1 village that had begun to trust him, 1 herbalist who was angry because she cared, 1 hunter who sat down beside him because he had finally learned the truth, 1 orphan girl who had come on her own, not knowing whom to turn to, and inside him, 12 layers of pain. Every night they played themselves out anew, the jumper's teeth on her, claws in his ribs, a blow to the temple, a gash down his back. Every death clear and vivid. He couldn't erase them, couldn't muffle them. They simply were. like files in a folder that can't be deleted. He lay there, breathing, waiting for his body to stop remembering. His body didn't stop. He knew it would never stop. On the 10th day, he went to check the western perimeter. The fog from Nizzen came irregularly. Baron said it was impossible to predict. People simply didn't go beyond the fence when the wind blew from the west. Sometimes the wind changed suddenly. Du-hyun wanted to understand the pattern. He stepped outside the palisade and headed west. Half an hour later, he caught a scent. Sweetish and heavy, like rotting fruit. Fog. A thin, white layer spread across the ground. Du-hyun inhaled. 15 minutes later, he started coughing. 30 minutes later, he couldn't stand. 45 minutes later, he was lying on the ground, feeling his lungs fill with fluid. A slow death. A long one. A painful one. He was gasping for 12 minutes before he lost consciousness. Death number 13, the longest one so far. He returned to the barn. Night, no moon. He lay there coughing even though there was nothing to cough up. His lungs were intact, but his body remembered the suffocation. The phantom cough lasted an hour. Then he took a notebook and began to write. Poisonous fog, lowlands. A sweet, rotting smell. First symptoms in 15 minutes. Loss of coordination in 30. Death in 50 to 60 minutes. Acts through breathing. Respiratory protection is needed. Check if a wet cloth helps. Check direction and density. Check layer height. The fog crept along the ground. Perhaps the concentration is lower on higher ground. 3 hypotheses. 3 future deaths. At least. He closed his notebook and lay down. 13 deaths in 10 days, and a notebook in which each of them has been turned into data. Data that will save lives, other people's lives, paid for with his pain. He closed his eyes and saw faces in the darkness beneath his eyelids. Yuna with a hot mug, Torin by the campfire, Maggie in the barn doorway. People for whom it was worth continuing. Maybe. The wet cloth didn't help. Du-hyun wrapped a wet rag around his face and stepped into the fog. He died an hour later instead of 50 minutes. A difference of 10 minutes. Not enough. Death number 14. He tried to climb the hill, a hill 200 paces west of the village. At the top of the hill, the fog was thinner. He held out for 2 hours before the concentration built up to a lethal level. Death number 15. Conclusion. Altitude reduces the concentration but does not eliminate it. The fog rises. Slowly, but it rises. Next attempt. He smeared grease on his face and breathed through 2 layers of fabric. He lasted an hour and a half on flat ground. Death number 16. The grease slowed absorption through the skin, so the poison penetrated not only through the lungs, but also through the skin. That was important. He jotted it down in his notebook. A dual route of poisoning, inhalation and contact. Full body protection is needed. Complete isolation. He went to see Yuna. He told her that the fog penetrates through the skin. Yuna turned pale. She said that this explains why one of her patients died even though he had covered his mouth and nose. His hands were exposed. Do-hyun asked if there was anything in her herbs that repelled the poison. Yuna thought for a moment. She said that when heated, marsh resin forms a film on the skin. It's used against insects. Perhaps it would also block the fog's poison. Do-hyun asked her to make an ointment. Yuna did. A thick green paste with a pungent odor. He smeared it from head to toe. He wrapped his face. He stepped into the fog. 3 hours. 4. 5. There were no symptoms. At the 6th hour, a slight cough began. The ointment was drying out and cracking. The protection was weakening. He emerged from the fog, alive. For the first time, he didn't die. He didn't come back to life. He just walked out on his own 2 feet, coughing, but alive. He returned to the village, and Yuna met him at the gate. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. He said the ointment worked. 5 hours of full protection. Then it dries out and needs to be reapplied. Yuna asked how many times he had died testing it. Do-hyun answered, 3. Yuna turned away. Her shoulders tensed. She said he was an idiot. Then she said she'd go make more ointment. Because if the west wind came suddenly, the village would need a supply. That's how their partnership worked. He died and brought back data. She turned the data into salvation. The fog ointment became the first real product of their collaboration. Baron ordered that every household keep a supply of the ointment. For the first time in 2 generations, Thornford was ready for the west wind. Do-hyun sat by the fire and reread his notebook. 16 deaths, 3 threats studied, forest jumpers, cave jumpers, poisonous fog. Maggie sat next to him and tried to peek at the notebook. He didn't hide it. She read slowly, running her finger along the lines. Maggie asked what death number 7 meant. Do-hyun explained. The jumper attacked from the ceiling, the 3rd one from the entrance. It jumped down when Do-hyun stopped on the 12th step. Maggie listened with her mouth agape. Then she asked how one could remember their own death. Do-hyun looked at her. He paused. Then he said that remembering wasn't hard. It was hard to forget. Maggie didn't understand, and it was good that she didn't. She was 17. She didn't need to understand that. The next day, someone new arrived in the village, a woman on horseback. Her clothes were expensive but worn. Her back was straight. Her hands were in gloves. A sword hung at her belt, not a decorative one, a working sword. The hilt was worn. The blade was narrow and long, a fencing sword. She dismounted at the gate and asked where she could find the man who had passed through Howling Ravine. Baron pointed to the barn. The woman approached Do-hyun. She introduced herself. Catherine Ashford. You can call me Kate. 21 years old, a former noblewoman, banished from the Ashford family for cowardice. She uttered that word herself, cowardice, with a hatred that thickened the air. Do-hyun asked what she considered cowardice. Kate replied. She had commanded a squad on a raid against the lair of the Bone Wolves. She lost 2 men in the first few minutes. She ordered a retreat. She saved the remaining 6. The Ashford clan did not forgive her for the loss of honor. Retreating in the face of beasts is a disgrace. It didn't matter how many people she saved. What mattered was that she ran. Do-hyun listened. Then he asked how old she was when it happened. 19. He asked how many people were in the squad. 8. He asked how many survived. 6. Out of 8, a 75% survival rate when facing a lair. He said those numbers out loud. 75%. In a world where expeditions vanish entirely, where the rift swallows squad after squad without a single survivor, 75% isn't cowardice. It's skill. Kate looked at him. Something flickered across her face, quickly, for a second. Then she turned to stone again. She said she hadn't come for comfort. She'd heard he knew how to navigate dangerous places. She wants to learn, or hire him, or just be there and watch, because she has nowhere else to go. Do-hyun looked at her sword. He asked if he could take a look. Kate handed it to him. He took the blade and examined it the way he used to inspect parts at the factory. Good steel. The balance is shifted toward the tip. a blade for quick, stabbing strikes. But there's a micro crack at the base, a tiny one, invisible to the naked eye, but he saw it. A former failure analyst saw cracks the way others saw colors. He told her the sword would break. Not now, after 30 or 40 serious strikes. The crack was at the base of the blade. If she went into battle with this sword, and if the opponent was strong enough, the blade would snap, and a piece of steel would fly into her face. Kate took the sword back. She looked at the base. She didn't see the crack. She looked at Do-hyun. She asked how he knew. He replied that he could see where things would break. That was his job. It had been his job. Kate put the sword away. Then she said she was staying. She didn't ask. She stated it. Do-hyun didn't argue. By evening, there were 3 of them in the barn. Do-hyun with a notebook, Maggie by the door, Kate by the wall. Yuna came in to bring food and saw the group. She snorted. She said the barn was turning into a shelter for vagrants. She set down a pot of soup. 4 bowls. Not 3. 4. She counted them herself. They ate in silence. 4 people by the fire in a barn at the edge of the world. Do-hyun looked at them and thought. 2 weeks ago, he had died on the wet stairs of an office building. Now he was sitting in a barn in a world with 2 moons. He has a notebook with 16 recorded deaths. He has scars that aren't on his body, but that burn inside him every night. And he has 3 people who, for some reason, decided to stay by his side. Yuna, who is angry because she fears for him. Maggie, who clings to him because she has no one else. Kate, who came because she was told that survival isn't cowardice. And for the first time in 2 years, she breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't know why he was here, didn't know who or what had brought him here, didn't know what kind of silence was watching him between deaths. But he knew one thing. These people were by his side, and as long as they were by his side, he had a reason to open his notebook every morning, even if every page in it was written in pain. The 3rd week in Turnhovbrod. Do-hyun stood at the edge of the training ground and watched as Kate fenced with a wooden pole. She was fast, very fast. Her signature move, a thrust from low to high from a low stance, took less than a second. The pole shook with every hit. But Do-hyun wasn't watching the strike. He was watching what came after. Kate struck and retreated. Every time. A strike and a step back. A strike and a step back. A reflex ingrained in her muscles by years of training. She didn't follow through. She didn't move forward. She attacked and immediately created distance, because she had been taught that survival was more important than victory, and because the Ashfords had called it cowardice and burned away her confidence in her own instincts. Do-hyun walked up to her and said her strike was good. Kate nodded. He said the retreat after the strike was good too. Kate tensed. He said the problem wasn't the retreat itself, but that she was retreating out of fear rather than calculation. There's a difference. A tactical retreat is when you know where you're retreating to and why. Her retreat is reflexive. She doesn't choose a position, she just runs backward. Kate clenched her jaw. She asked how he would know. Do-hyun replied that he had died enough times to know the difference between a deliberate move and panic. Every first time he died at the hands of a new creature was panic. Every 5th time was calculated. Kate was silent. Do-hyun made her an offer. He said he would go into the woods toward the jumpers' territory. Not into the ravine, into the woods. There was one jumper there, the very first one. He'd studied it over 2 deaths. He knew its attack. He knew the timing. He suggested Kate go with him. He'd stand in front of the jumper. The jumper would attack, and Kate would strike the moment it jumps. Her upward thrust from below would perfectly match the jumper's trajectory in the air. If she hit it in the gut as it came down, the creature would plunge onto the blade by its own momentum. One strike, one movement. Kate asked what would happen if she missed. Do-hyun said that then the jumper would kill him, and he would come back, and they would try again. Kate turned pale. She said she couldn't use him as bait. Do-hyun replied that it wasn't bait, it was calibration. He does this with every creature. The only difference is that this time, someone with a sword would be nearby. They set out the next morning. Do-hyun led the way. Kate was 5 paces behind. She'd left her sword in the village. Do-hyun had found a blacksmith in Copper Outpost through Baron and ordered a reforge. The crack had to be fixed. In the meantime, Kate was using a spare blade from the village armory. Shorter and heavier than she was used to, but it worked. Do-hyun entered the leaper's territory. He knew the boundary. 120 steps from the edge of the forest. On the 121st step, the jumper began its hunt. He stopped at the 125th. He waited. A rustle in the bushes. A familiar rhythm. The creature emerged. 6 eyes. Drool. Do-hyun stood still. Kate stood to his left and below him in a low stance. The jumper attacked. Its hind legs pushed off, its body soared. Half a second. Kate struck. The stab didn't hit the belly, it hit the front paw. The blade went in 3 fingers deep and slipped out. The jumper yelped and crashed into Do-hyun, claws at his throat. Darkness. Silence. That very one. The attentive one. This time, he lingered in it a little longer, a fraction of a second. And he heard. Not a voice, not a word, more like a direction, as if the silence were pointing somewhere. North. Then a chill down his spine. A barn. Night. Death number 17. He lay there and waited for the phantom pain in his throat to pass. Then he got up and went to look for Kate. She was sitting by the extinguished fire, alone, hands on her knees, back straight, face stony. But he could see she was trembling, slightly, barely noticeable. She didn't look at him when he sat down beside her. She said she'd missed. He replied that he knew. She said he'd died because of her. He replied that he'd died because of the jumper. Because of her, he'd get the data for a second attempt. She turned her head, looked at him. In her eyes was something he'd only seen before in a mirror. Guilt that couldn't be washed away. She said she'd seen him die, seen his eyes the moment the claws sank into his throat. He was calm. He wasn't afraid. And that was scarier than anything she'd ever seen in her life. Do-hyun didn't know how to respond. He fell silent. Then he said he was afraid, just for a split second. The fear lasted half a second. Then came the pain. Then nothing. He's no hero. He's just used to it. And that's not a consolation. It's a diagnosis. Kate didn't answer. They sat in silence until dawn. In the morning, they went again. This time, Do-hyun adjusted his position. He told Kate to stand to the right. When the jumper leaps, he turns slightly to the left in the air, exposing his right side. The belly isn't the best target. The best target is the armpit of the front right paw. The skin is thin there. He knew this because when the jumper killed him the first time, Do-hyun saw his body up close. In the light of the 2 moons, the fur on the armpit was shorter and lighter. The spot where the skin stretches during a jump. The point of tension. The point of failure. Kate listened. She moved to the right. Lower. The jumper leaped. Kate struck. The blade sank into the armpit to its full length. The creature twitched in midair and crashed down. Not dead, but immobilized. Its right front paw had failed. The jumper whimpered and tried to stand. Kate finished it off with a second blow to the neck. Silence. The creature lay dead. Kate stood over it. The sword was covered in blood. Her hands didn't tremble. She looked at Do-hyun. He said one word. Clean. Kate exhaled, long and ragged, like a person who had been holding their breath for 2 years. She sheathed the sword, looked at her hands, looked at the dead jumper, and said that this was the first fight in 2 years in which she hadn't backed down. Do-hyun replied that she hadn't backed down because she knew where to strike. Knowledge dispels fear. Fear disappears when understanding comes. Her problem had never been cowardice. Her problem was that she went into battle without knowing enough. And when knowledge was lacking, she compensated with caution. That isn't cowardice. It's common sense. Kate listened. Then she asked quietly, how many times had he died to find that spot? Do-hyun answered, 2 for the jumper, 15 more for other things. 17 in total so far. Kate looked at him. Then she did something he didn't expect. She bowed. Not a social bow, a warrior's bow. Deep, like a student to a master. She said she recognized him. Do-hyun told her to stand up and that he wasn't a master. Kate stood up. She said that a master is someone who makes a student stronger. By that definition, he was a master. Do-hyun couldn't think of a rebuttal. They returned to the village with the jumper's carcass. Maggie saw them first and screamed for the whole village to hear. People poured out of their houses. A jumper! A dead jumper! The creature Thornford had feared for generations. It lay by the gate like a hunting trophy. Kate stood nearby, upright, calm, without a trace of the shame she had carried for 2 years. Yuna approached Do-hyun. She looked at his neck. His neck was intact, but she saw it. She always saw. She asked again. He nodded. Yuna turned away. Her hands clenched into fists, then unclenched. Then she walked over to the jumper's carcass and began to examine it. Glands, claws, saliva. If the creature is dead, its venom can be studied, an antidote can be made. It can be done. For the first time. Do-hyun watched Yuna work. Her hands moved with confidence and precision. The hands of a doctor who had obtained the material for a real medicine for the first time. He smiled, almost imperceptibly, and immediately felt a phantom chill on his neck. The memory of the claws. 17 deaths, each one inside him, each one forever. A month in Thornford. For the first time in a generation, the village had lived through a full season without any losses. Not a single dead body, not a single missing person. The mist ointment worked. The route through the ravine worked. There were fewer jumpers in the nearby forest after Kate killed the second one using the same method. Do-hyun's notebook had grown to 40 pages. Yuna traded with the same merchant to get him a second one. This time she gave up 5 vials. Business was going better. The fog ointment turned out to be a marketable commodity. Baron began selling it in Copper Outpost. For the first time, the village was making money not from food, but from knowledge. From knowledge brought by a man from nowhere. Do-hyun sat in the barn and copied his notes into a clean notebook. Maggie sat beside him and helped. She had learned to read his handwriting and transferred the data from the rough draft boards to the notebook, neatly, diligently, sticking out the tip of her tongue from the effort. Do-hyun wasn't teaching her how to die. He was teaching her how to take notes, how to keep an observation log, how to describe a creature so that the description would be useful a year from now. Size, limb type, speed, aggression triggers, reaction time, weak points. Every entry a template. Every template a life saved in the future. Maggie asked why he wasn't teaching her to fight. Do-hyun replied that fighting is the last skill. The first skill is observation. The second is recording. The third is analysis. If she masters the first three, she'll almost never need the fourth. Maggie pouted, but she kept writing. She wanted to be a warrior. He was turning her into an analyst. One day she'll understand why. That same day, news reached the village. A caravan from Copper Outpost brought word. The Adventurers Guild in Kronheim had announced a reward for information about the Rift of Silence. 200 gold for any data, 500 for a surviving witness, 1,000 for a map of the inner regions. 1,000 gold pieces. Baron said that was more than the village earned in 5 years. Do-hyun jotted down the numbers and said nothing. But that night, he lay in the barn and thought about the rift, about the silence between deaths, about the direction it pointed. North. The rift in the north. The silence that recognized him. He wasn't ready yet, but he knew that one day he would go. Not for gold, for an answer. In the morning, more news arrived, worse news. A caravan driver reported that a preacher had appeared in Kronheim, from the Church of the One Exodus. He spoke of a heretic on the outskirts, of a man who desecrates death, who dies and returns. The caravan driver didn't know the details, but Beren looked at Do-hyun, and you could tell by his face that he understood. Rumors were spreading. The village knew about Do-hyun's ability. Torin knew. Yuna knew. Kate had seen it with her own eyes. Maggie had overheard conversations. Someone had told the merchant. The merchant had told the outpost. The outpost had told Kronheim. And the church had heard. Do-hyun didn't panic. He jotted it down in his notebook. The Church of the One Exodus. They've learned about the respawn. Reaction time unknown. Threat undetermined. Need data. Yuna approached him that evening. She looked worried. She said the church wasn't like the beasts of the forest. Beasts can be studied and outmaneuvered. The church is people. People are worse than creatures. They adapt. Do-hyun replied that he knew. Yuna asked what he was going to do. Do-hyun replied that nothing for now. Until he had data on the enemy, he couldn't make a plan. Yuna said that was madness, that you couldn't wait until they found you. Do-hyun looked at her and saw for the first time in her eyes real fear. Not for herself, for him. He told her he wouldn't leave, that he wouldn't abandon the village. Yuna turned away. She said quietly that it wasn't about the village. Then she walked away quickly. Do-hyun sat there, watching her go. Something inside him shifted, a small shift, like a crack in the opposite direction. Not destruction, but the beginning of something. He didn't write it down in his notebook. Some things aren't meant to be written down. The following week, another person arrived in Thornford. A young woman in the robes of the Mages Guild. The robe was gray with silver trim. Research rank, the lowest. Archival. She arrived on a mule. The mule was loaded with bags from which scrolls and glass tubes were sticking out. She dismounted the mule and immediately dropped 2 bags. The scrolls scattered. A glass tube shattered. She said a word that Do-hyun didn't expect to hear from a mage. Then she began to gather them up. Maggie ran over to help. Maggie always ran over to new people. Curiosity trumps caution. The woman looked up and smiled. The smile was wide and a little crazy, like someone who lives inside their own head and sometimes forgets there's a world outside. She introduced herself. Liliana Vale. You can call me Lily. 19 years old, a mage researcher, former guild archivist. Former because she was kicked out. For what? For the fact that her experiments killed people. Not on purpose. She was studying mana resonance in living tissue. The theory was brilliant. The practice was deadly. 3 volunteers died during testing. The guild shut down the research and sent Lily to the archives. For good. Lily sat in the archives for a year. Then she heard from a caravan driver about a man who dies and comes back. And her eyes lit up with the fire that makes geniuses dangerous. She escaped from the archives and traveled to Thornford. She found Dokyan in a barn, and the first thing she said wasn't a greeting. The first thing she said was that his ability violated the 3rd law of mage thermodynamics, that it was impossible, and that she needed to kill him at least once to measure the residual resonance at the moment of transition. Dokyan looked at her, then at Maggie, who was standing nearby with her mouth agape, then back at Lily. He asked calmly, had she just asked him to kill him? Lily blinked, then she blushed. She said it sounded bad. She said she didn't mean to kill him, but to let him die under controlled conditions while she took measurements. Du-hyun asked what the difference was. Lily thought for a full 5 seconds. Then she said it was in the wording. Du-hyun almost laughed. Almost. He said he wouldn't die for science right now, but if she told him everything she knew about Ayrton magic, he'd tell her everything he knew about his gift. An exchange of information. Lily agreed instantly. They talked late into the night. Lily explained the basics of magic. Mana is the energy that permeates all living things. Mages use it for spells, but mana is finite. A mage can exhaust their supply and then they're just a human. Recovery is slow, days, sometimes weeks. That's exactly why mages are cautious. Every spell is an investment. Spend too much, and you're defenseless. The Rift of Silence devours mana. Around it lies a dead zone where magic doesn't work. Mages who entered it lost their power and died helpless. Do-hyun listened and took notes. Mana, resonance, dead zone. His gift didn't require mana, he'd checked. Yuna had told him he had no mana at all. 0. Absolute, magical 0. It was strange. In Ayrton, every living thing had at least a drop of mana. Except him. Lily was thrilled by this fact. She said it explained why the dead zone of the rift had no effect on him. You can't take away what isn't there. Do-hyun wrote it down. No mana. Immunity to the dead zone. Potential advantage when entering the rift. Silence. He didn't say it out loud, but he wrote it down. Lily fell asleep right there in the barn, her head resting on her scrolls. Maggie covered her with a blanket. Do-hyun sat and looked at his notebook. 16 pages, 3 creatures, 1 poison, 1 protective ointment, 1 safe route, 1 trained fencer, 1 budding circle of people, and 1 growing shadow in the north that called him by a name he couldn't remember. The second month began with rain. A cold, fine rain fell for 3 days without stopping. Du-hyun used this time. He sat in the barn with Lily, and they built a theory. Lily sketched diagrams of magical currents on paper. Du-hyun asked questions. Each of her answers spawned 3 new questions. She spoke quickly, swallowing the ends of her sentences and jumping from topic to topic. He stopped her and made her go back. Repeat, slower, with the numbers. Lily got annoyed. Then she got used to it. Then she began to structure her thoughts herself before speaking. Do-hyun wasn't teaching her magic. He was teaching her to think like an engineer, to break a big problem down into small ones, to test one variable at a time, to record the result even if it seemed obvious. Lily was a genius. Her problem wasn't with her mind, but with her method. She threw out ideas like sparks, 100 sparks and not a single flame. Do-hyun gave her a focus. On the 4th day of rain, Lily proposed an experiment. She wanted to measure what happens to the space around Do-hyun at the moment of death. She had an artifact, a small crystal that recorded magical fluctuations. If Do-hyun died near the crystal, Lily would be able to read the recording and understand the mechanics of resurrection. Do-hyun considered the proposal. The risk was minimal. Death was controlled. The data was potentially priceless. He agreed. Yuna found out about it and flew into a rage. She burst into the barn and told Lily that she wouldn't kill a person for the sake of scientific curiosity. Lily replied that it wasn't curiosity, but research, and that Do-hyun had agreed voluntarily. Yuna turned to Do-hyun and asked if he was serious. Do-hyun replied that he was, that every death of his so far had been either accidental or for the sake of reconnaissance. This one would be for the sake of understanding his own ability. For the first time, he would obtain data not about creatures, but about himself. Yuna stood there and looked at him. Then she spoke softly. She said that every time he spoke so calmly about his own death, something inside her broke. She said that a doctor should not agree to let a patient die, even if the patient is immortal. Then she left. Do-hyun stared at the closed door. Lily quietly asked if they should cancel it. Do-hyun paused. Then he said no. They conducted the experiment the next day, outside the village, in a quiet spot by a stream. Lily placed the crystal on a rock 3 steps away from Do-hyun. She started the recording. Kate stood to the side and watched. Maggie wanted to watch too, but Do-hyun told her to leave. She shouldn't see this. Maggie left, offended, but she obeyed. Do-hyun took the knife. He looked at Lily. She nodded. Her face was pale. Her hands clutched the scrolls. He thought that for a person who had asked him to kill her, she looked as if she were about to cry. He did it quickly, the blade against her throat. The pain was short and sharp. Blood, darkness, silence. This time the silence lasted longer. 3 seconds, maybe 4. And in it he felt the direction again, north. But this time there was something else, a sensation, as if someone were standing nearby in the darkness, not hostile, not friendly, just present, watching. And for a split second before returning, he felt that this presence was familiar, as if he had met it before. Not in this world, not in the past, in something else. Then the cold, the barn, night. He was back. Death number 18. The first intentional one. In the morning, he went to the stream. Kate and Lily were there. Lily was sitting over the crystal and looked as if the world had turned upside down. The crystal recorded the data. Lily described it in a trembling voice. At the moment of Do-hyun's death, a pulse arose around his body. Not magical, anti-magical. A wave that did not carry mana but absorbed it. For a split second, everything within a 10-step radius lost its magical properties. The grass stopped growing. The water in the stream froze for an instant. The crystal nearly burned out. Lily said it was the same energy as in the dead zone of the Rift of Silence. The very same. At the moment of Do-hyun's death, the space around him became part of the rift for a split second. Do-hyun recorded it. Connection confirmed. Death and the rift are one system. He is part of this system. His transfer to Eritan is no accident. Lily looked at him, and in her eyes, instead of scientific delight, there was something else. Anxiety. She said that if his gift is connected to the rift, then the rift is connected to him. And that means the rift knows about him. Is it growing faster because Do-hyun is dying? Does it feed on each of his deaths? She didn't know. But the question hung in the air like fog from Nizzen. Sweet and poisonous. Do-hyun wrote down the question, not the answer. The question. Does the frequency of deaths affect the rift's growth? If so, then each of his deaths not only wounds him, but also feeds the crack from which the unknown creeps out. The price might be higher than he thought. He closed his notebook and looked north. The sky there was gray and empty. But he knew that beyond the horizon, hundreds of leagues from here, a wound gaped in the earth. And that wound knew his name. Yuna hadn't spoken to him for 2 days after the experiment. On the 3rd day, she came to the barn. Silently, she set a mug of hot brew in front of him. The same one. Bitter. For the tremors. Do-hyun took the mug. Their fingers touched for a moment. Yuna pulled her hand away, but not immediately, with a half-second delay. Do-hyun noticed. An engineer always notices a delay. Yuna sat down across from him. She was silent for a moment. Then she said she'd read his notes on marsh plants, the page where he described the stages of poisoning. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45. An hour. She said that if she'd known this earlier, she would have saved Alan, her patient, a 14-year-old boy, bitten by a swamp creature a year and a half ago. She didn't know the symptoms, didn't know at what minute to start which treatment. The boy died in her arms. She still remembered his face. Do-hyun listened, didn't interrupt. When she fell silent, he said he would go to the marshes, that he would check everything, every minute of the poisoning, every symptom. He would write it all down and bring it to her, so that the next person bitten wouldn't die. Yuna looked at him. Her eyes were shining, but she wasn't crying. She said she hated it, hated that the only way to save future patients was to let him die over and over again. Do-hyun replied that he hated it too, but hatred wasn't a reason to stop. Yuna didn't answer. She just sat there and drank her potion, right beside him. That was enough. Do-hyun left for the swamps at dawn, alone. Kate wanted to go with him, but he refused. The swamps were no place for a fencer. There was nothing to cut down there. There was only dying and recording. The journey took 2 days. He walked through the lowlands along the edge of the fog zone, ointment on his skin, a notebook in a waterproof bag that Maggie had sewn. The girl didn't know how to sew, but she learned overnight. The stitches were crooked, but the bag kept the water out. Do-hyun thought about Maggie as he walked. She had begged to go with him. He said no. She was offended. She said he treated her like a child. He replied that she was a child. She was 17. Her life was her only one, not reloadable. He had no right to risk what could not be brought back. Maggie didn't understand. Or maybe she did, but she didn't accept it. She stood at the gate and watched him walk away. And he saw that same longing in her eyes, the fear of being abandoned. He promised he'd come back. She didn't believe him. People who've been abandoned their whole lives don't believe in promises. They believe in comebacks. The swamps began suddenly. The ground simply became soft, then wet. Then it was gone. Brown water, mounds covered in moss, the smell of rot. The trees were thin and crooked, trunks white as bone. Silence. Not that kind of silence. Ordinary. Dead. No birds, no insects, only the sloshing of water underfoot. Do-hyeon found the swamp creature 3 hours later. The creature was sitting in stagnant water between the mounds, the size of a barrel, gray-green. Its eyes were bulging and dull. Its skin was bumpy, motionless as a stone. If he hadn't been looking for it on purpose, he would have stepped on it. He took 2 steps closer. The swamp creature didn't move. 1 more step. The creature burst into motion. Its mouth opened as wide as his shoulders. Its tongue lashed out like a whip. A blow to the thigh. A bite. The pain was dull and deep, as if a red-hot nail had been driven into his leg. The swamp monster let go and plunged back into the water. 1 movement. Half a second. Then stillness again. Do-hyun stood on a hummock and looked at the bite. 2 holes, 4 fingers width apart. No blood. The edges of the wound had already begun to turn white. Venom. He timed it. The first minute, pain at the bite site, a burning sensation. The second minute, the burning sensation spreads up his leg. The 5th minute, a slight numbness in his foot. He was taking notes, a pencil in one hand, a notebook in the other. His handwriting was steady. The 10th minute, numbness up to his knee. His leg wouldn't obey him. A slight nausea. 15th minute, first cough. Yuna was right. Symptoms begin at the 15th minute. But she didn't know there was an invisible phase before that. Numbness and nausea. Signs the patient might hide or not notice. The doctor must ask. Sensations in the limbs. Nausea. Don't wait for the cough. By the time you cough, it's already too late. The 20th minute. Both legs were numb. He was sitting on a bump. He couldn't stand up. The nausea was intense. His vision began to blur. The 25th minute. A cough with blood, tiny droplets. The poison was destroying the capillaries in his lungs. He was writing. The letters grew larger and more crooked. His hands wouldn't obey him. 30th minute. He dropped his pencil. He couldn't pick it up. His fingers wouldn't bend. He lay on the mound and memorized. He memorized everything he couldn't write down. His body temperature, the sensations in his chest, the pressure in his temples. 35th minute. He stopped feeling his hands. His chest was burning. His breathing was heavy and raspy. Every breath felt like it was through a wet cloth. The 40th minute. The convulsions began. Yuna had said the 40th minute. That was right. He was shaking and couldn't control his body, but his mind was still working. He was counting. The rhythm of the convulsions, the intervals. Which muscles first? Legs, then abs, then arms, then neck. 45 minutes. The convulsions were constant. His consciousness was slipping away. He held on, counted the seconds. Every second is data. The 50th minute. His heart. He felt it losing its rhythm. Arrhythmia. A beat, a pause, 2 beats, a long pause. The poison had reached his heart muscle. The 55th minute. He stopped breathing. His body gave out, but his mind was still burning. 10 seconds. 15. 20. He lay dead and was still thinking. And the last thought before the silence wasn't about the pain. It was about Yuna. About how she'd tell him he was an idiot when he returned with a full description of his symptoms. Death number 19. The longest. 57 minutes from the bite to the end. 57 minutes that he remembered second by second. He returned. The barn. Night. Thornford. 2 days' journey back. He lay there, and his body remembered everything. Numbness. Convulsions. A heart that stopped. He trembled for 40 minutes. Then he opened his notebook and began to write. Stages of swamp viper poisoning. First stage, 0 to 15 minutes, latent phase, numbness in the limbs, nausea, no external signs. Second stage, 15 to 30 minutes, coughing, blood in the sputum, loss of mobility. Third stage, 30 to 40 minutes, loss of sensation, paralysis spreading from the periphery to the center. Stage 4, 40 to 50 minutes, convulsions, loss of consciousness in most cases. Stage 5, 50 to 60 minutes, cardiac arrest. Window for treatment, the first 15 minutes, before the coughing begins. After the cough, the toxin is already in the lungs. Action must be taken during the latent phase. Ask the patient about numbness and nausea. Do not wait for visible symptoms. He wrote 3 pages in small, neat handwriting. Every minute, every symptom, every detail. Then he lay down and closed his eyes and saw a swamp in the darkness. The swamp dweller's dull eyes, a maw, a tongue, and 57 minutes of hell that he now carried within himself forever. 19 layers of pain. The last one the hardest. Not because the pain was stronger, because it lasted longer. Because he was conscious almost until the end. He lay there and waited for morning. Morning came. He found Una. He placed a notebook open to the right page in front of her. Una read in silence. Her face changed with every line. It paled. It flushed. It paled again. When she reached the line about the latent phase, she stopped. She reread it. She reread it again. Then she looked up at Do-hyun. She said that hidden phase. What if she'd known about the numbness and nausea? She would have started giving blood-purifying herbs at the 10-minute mark, not at the 40-minute mark when it's already too late. She would have saved Alan. Do-hyun nodded. Una looked at him, then at the notebook, then at him again. She asked how long he had been dying. He answered, 57 minutes. Una covered her mouth with her hand. She wasn't crying. Doctors don't cry. But her eyes were glistening, and the hand holding the notebook was trembling. She said he had spent an hour in agony so she could save the next child. Do-hyun didn't answer. Una stood up. She took the notebook. She said she was going to prepare the antidote. Now she knows which herbs are needed at which minute. Now she has a protocol. The first protocol in the history of Turnovoy Broad for treating a swamp snake bite. Bought with an hour of someone else's death. She left. Do-hyun sat alone. His hands were shaking, a slight, unceasing tremor. He looked at his palms and remembered how they had stopped obeying him at the 30-minute mark, how the pencil had fallen and he couldn't pick it up, how his body was dying piece by piece while he counted the seconds. He clenched his fists. The tremor didn't subside. He stood up and walked to the stream. He sat down on the rock where Lily had placed her crystal. He lowered his hands into the cold water. He held them there until his fingers went numb. Real numbness, not phantom. And only then did the tremor subside. Not for long, but long enough to close his eyes and breathe. 19. Only 19. And hundreds more lay ahead. He knew it. The rift in the north awaited him, and every death brought him closer to the answer. And every death added another layer to the storehouse of pain that smiled. Do-hyun returned from the barn to the square and saw that something had changed in the village. By the A horse stood at the gate that hadn't been there in the morning. Gray, large, a government-issued saddle. There was a brand on the saddle, a crown and a sword. The Royal Courier Service. Baron stood by his house with the face of a man who had swallowed a stone. Next to him stood a man in traveling clothes, a dark blue cloak with a silver clasp. At his belt, not a sword, but a scroll in a leather tube. An official, not a soldier. The man saw Do-hyun and smiled. It was a professional smile. Do-hyun had seen smiles like that at meetings in his past life. A smile that meant nothing except that the man wanted something from you. The man introduced himself. Graves, advisor to the governor of Valcrest Province. He said the governor had heard about an unusual man in Thornford, a man who maps dangerous zones, who had made the village safer in 2 months than the Adventurers Guild had in 10 years. The governor was impressed. The governor wants to propose a partnership. Do-hyun listened. Graves spoke at length and eloquently. The Crown is interested in the security of the provinces. The rift of silence is expanding. Expeditions are vanishing. Knowledge of the rift is worth more than gold. If Do-hyun possesses a unique ability to acquire such knowledge, the Crown is ready to provide for him. Money, equipment, status, protection from the church. Graves said the last part a little more quietly, as if in passing, but that was the main point. Protection from the church, in exchange for what? Graves smiled again. In exchange for information. The Crown wants to send Do-hyun to the rift, with a detachment, under the royal banner. He will enter the rift as many times as necessary and bring back a map of what's inside. Do-hyun looked at Graves. Then he asked how many times as many as necessary meant. Graves replied that it meant as many as needed for a complete map. 100, 200, 1,000. The Crown is willing to wait. The Crown is patient. Do-hyun asked if the Crown knew that every entry into the rift meant his death. Graves replied that the Crown was aware of his ability, and that was precisely why he was the ideal candidate, a resource that never runs out. Resource. The word struck Do-hyun like a stone. Not a person, a resource, infinitely renewable, can be spent without counting. He looked at Graves and saw in his eyes the same thing he'd seen in the eyes of the managers at the factory when they discussed consumables. Calculation. Pure calculation, disregarding the fact that the consumable feels pain. Do-hyun replied that he'd think about it. Graves nodded. He said he had a week. The governor is waiting for an answer. And he added that the church had already sent an inquisitor, a certain Valens Mora, a senior investigator. He would be in the province in 2 or 3 weeks. Without the protection of the Crown, it would be difficult for Do-hyun. Graves left. Do-hyun stood in the square and thought. A trap, beautiful and precise. The church on one side, the Crown on the other. One side wants to destroy him. The other wants to use him. The result for him is the same. Pain. Endless. Yuna approached first. She had heard the conversation. All of it, or almost all of it. She asked what he was going to do. Do-hyun replied that he needed time. Yuna said there was no time. 3 weeks until the Inquisitor arrives. 1 week until the Crown's answer. Do-hyun nodded. Kate approached second. She had heard the word resource. Her face was hard. She said that the Crown wanted the same thing her clan had wanted, to throw people into the meat grinder for the sake of results. Only her clan, at least, hadn't called it cooperation. Lily approached third. She was pale. She said that if his deaths feed the rift, then the Crown essentially wants to accelerate the growth of the crack by throwing him in there hundreds of times. They would be feeding the catastrophe with the body of a single man. Du-hyun jotted it down in his notebook. Threats, the church, Inquisitor Valens Moore, 3 weeks, the Crown, a trap, a week, the rift. A possible connection between the frequency of deaths and the growth of the crack, unconfirmed but likely. 3 threats. 1 from people who consider him an abomination, 1 from people who consider him a tool, and 1 from something that might be greater than he is capable of understanding. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in the barn and listened to the breathing of Maggie, who was sleeping by the door, Lily, who was sleeping on the scrolls in the corner, Kate, who wasn't sleeping and was sharpening her sword in the dark. The quiet, rhythmic sound of stone on steel. She was thinking too. Do-hyun got up and went outside. The night was clear. 2 moons, white and red. He looked north. There, beyond the horizon, the rift of silence, which knew his name, which might have grown with each of his deaths, which was calling him. He stood and thought. Then Yuna approached him. She hadn't been sleeping either. She stood beside him, silently. They stood and looked north. Yuna spoke first. She said he wouldn't go to the rift, not now, not alone, not on the Crown's orders. Do-hyun replied that he hadn't planned to. Yuna said she knew him. In 2 months, she'd learned to read him. He writes everything down in a notebook. But what he doesn't write down is always the same thing. The next target, the next death, the next step north. Do-hyun said nothing. She was right. Yuna turned to him. She said he wasn't a resource, not a tool, not a phenomenon to be studied, not heresy to be destroyed. He is a person who trembles at night and hides his hands so no one sees the tremor, who wakes up screaming, but does it so quietly that only she hears it because she isn't sleeping, because she's listening every night. Do-hyun looked at her. She was standing in the moonlight, 2 moons, white and red. The light fell on her face, and he could see she wasn't angry. For the first time in 2 months, there was no anger in her eyes. There was exhaustion. There was concern. And there was a third thing he couldn't name and didn't try to. He told her she was right, that he was human, that he trembled, that he was afraid, that every death was hell, and that 19 hells were already inside him, and that there would be more. But he said he couldn't stop, not because he didn't want to, because if he stopped, then Alan would be the last boy she hadn't saved, and Torin's brother would be the last person to die in the ravine out of ignorance, and the next expedition to the rift would vanish without a trace, because no one could return to tell the tale. Except him. Yuna listened. Then she did something he didn't expect. She took his hand, his right one, the one that was shaking. She held his hand in both of hers, tightly. Her palms were warm and rough from working with herbs. She didn't say anything. She just held on. And the trembling subsided. Not from the cold water, not from an act of will, from the warmth of another's hands. They stood like that for a minute, or 5, or all night. Do-hyun didn't count. For the first time in 19 deaths, he didn't count. The morning after his conversation with Yuna began with Do-hyun sleeping through dawn for the first time in 2 months. He opened his eyes, and the sun was already high in the sky. Maggie was sitting by the door, nibbling on a cracker. She said she hadn't woken him up. She said it was the first time he hadn't screamed in his sleep. Do-hyun sat up. He looked at his hands. The tremor was there, but weaker than yesterday. He stood up and went out to the square. The village was going about its usual business. Baren was repairing the fence. Women were carrying water. Children were running around. But there was tension in the air. Everyone knew about Graves's visit. Everyone knew that something bigger than the jumpers and swamp dwellers was hunting beyond the village. Do-hyun gathered everyone in the barn: Yuna, Kate, Lily, Maggie. Torin came on his own. He wasn't part of the circle, but he was part of the village, and the village was part of this story. Do-hyun laid out 6 wooden boards on the floor, a diagram on each. First board: The Church of the One Exodus, what is known. They believe death is sacred and final. They consider him a heretic. They sent an inquisitor, Valens Moore, chief inquisitor. He will arrive in 2.5 weeks. Unknown. His capabilities, his methods, his resources. How many people are with him? Second plank: The Crown, what is known. Wants to use him for mapping the rift. Considers him a resource. Gave a week to respond. Offers protection from the church. Unknown. What will happen if he refuses? Do they have other means of pressure? Third board: The Rift of Silence. What is known? A crack into the other side. Absorbs mana. A dead zone surrounds it. Expeditions vanish. A connection to his gift has been confirmed. It may be growing from his deaths. Unknown. Almost everything. What is inside? Why it calls to him? Who or what is there? Fourth tablet: Save point. What is known? He returns to the place where he spent more than an hour in peace. Now it is a barn. Unknown. Is it tied to an object? To a place? To something else? Can he move it? Fifth tablet: His gift. What is known? Immortality through return. 0 mana. Immunity to the dead zone. Every death generates an anti-magic impulse identical to the energy of the rift. Memory of all deaths. Unknown. Where does the gift come from? Why was it given? Is there a limit? Can it be lost? The sixth board. Empty. A single word on it. Plan. He looked at his circle. 6 pairs of eyes. Yuna was serious and focused. Kate was tense and ready. Lily was excited and frightened at the same time. Maggie was confused but straightforward. Torin is gloomy and heavy. Do-hyun said they have 2.5 weeks, and that he isn't going to run. He wasn't going to hide. He wasn't going to accept the crown's terms. And he wasn't going to wait for the inquisitor like a death sentence. He was going to do what he always did: gather information, make a plan, and carry it out. Kate asked what kind of information. Do-hyun answered. He needed to know who Valens Moore was, what he really wanted, how he operated, what his authority is, and what the church considers sufficient grounds to halt the persecution. Lily asked how he planned to find that out. Do-hyun looked at her, then at Torin. Torin knew the region, every trail, every merchant. He had connections in Copper Outpost and beyond. Do-hyun asked him to find out everything he could about Mora, not through dangerous channels, through conversations, through merchants, through travelers. The inquisitor traveled openly. He didn't hide. People of the church don't hide. They want to be seen. So rumors about him travel ahead of him. Torin nodded and left that same day. Kate was given another task. Do-hyun asked her to train every day. Not with him, alone. He gave her a set of moves, a thrust from bottom to top, a step to the right, a counterattack to the armpit. 3 moves. Practice them until they become reflexes. If it came down to a fight, she wouldn't need 10 moves, but just one. The perfect one. Kate didn't argue. She grabbed her sword and headed to the training ground. Lily was given a task that thrilled her. Do-hyun asked her to study the anti-magic pulse more deeply. He wanted to know if it could be replicated without causing his death. If his gift creates a dead zone for a moment, could Lily create an artifact that does the same? A dead zone on demand. A weapon that shuts down magic. Lily grabbed the scrolls and ran to the stream. Maggie received a task that angered her. Do-hyun asked her to map out the village. Every house, every exit, every gap in the fence, every place to hide. If the Inquisitor came with people, the village would need an evacuation plan. Maggie wanted to fight. Do-hyun gave her a pencil and paper. She left with a face like a storm cloud. But she left, and she did it. In 2 days, she drew a map better than Do-hyun had expected. Accurate, to scale, with notes. The girl had an eye for detail. Yuna stayed behind. She asked what she should do. Do-hyun paused. Then he said she needed to finish the antidote for the swamp creature, and prepare a supply of fog ointment, and pack a first aid kit in case they had to leave quickly. Yuna nodded. Then she asked about something else. She asked what he would be doing himself. Do-hyun replied that he needed to die a few more times. Yuna didn't flinch. She was already used to those words, but being used to them didn't mean it didn't hurt. She asked why. Hyun explained. He needed to check the save point. He suspected it was tied not to a place, but to an object. Something in the barn, something he hadn't noticed. Every time he returned, he found himself in the same position in the same corner. Not just in the barn, at a specific spot. Something was pulling him there. He was going to die outside the village and check if the point shifted when he moved objects in the barn. Yuna listened. Then she said one word. She said, "Okay," and left. Do-hyun began his test that same day. He rearranged everything in the barn. Barrels, sacks, tools. Then he went outside the village and found a way to die quickly. A jumper in the woods. A new one. On the old man's property. Death number 20. Quick. A second. He returned to the barn. The same spot. Nothing had shifted. Objects on the surface had no effect. He cleared everything from the corner. Bare earthen floor. Nothing. Died again. Death number 21. He returned. Same spot. He began to dig. A palm's depth in, he found a stone. Flat, smooth, the size of his palm. Gray on one side, black on the other. Completely black, like a hole in the ground. He picked up the stone. Warm. Not from the earth, from within, with its own warmth. He turned the stone so the black side faced him and looked, and the stone looked back at him. Not with eyes, not with magic, with silence. That very silence he had heard between deaths. The stone was part of the rift, or the rift was part of the stone. Do-hyun held it in his hands and felt it. A direction. North, like a compass needle. The stone pointed toward where it had come from. He put the stone in a pouch and hung it around his neck. Then he left the village. He walked 200 paces south. He placed the stone on the ground. He sat there for an hour, calmly. Then he went to the jumper. Death number 22. He opened his eyes. Not in the barn, on the ground. 200 paces south of the village, next to the stone. The save point had shifted. It was tied to the stone. Do-hyun sat on the ground holding the stone, warm, quiet, his anchor in this world, his connection to the rift, his curse, and his tool. He wrote it down in his notebook. The save point is tied to an object, a stone, a fragment of the rift of silence. Portable, warm, points north. Reacts to the silence between deaths. Was likely in the ground before I arrived, likely the reason for my appearance right here. He returned the stone to the barn, buried it back, for now. Then he lay down and closed his eyes. 22 deaths, each one inside. The last 3 were quick. The leaper, a second, almost no pain. Almost. But the sum was growing. 22 layers, 22 agonies. He breathed and waited for morning. Torin returned 5 days later. He had found a great deal. Valens Moore was a well-known man. He was known from Kronheim to the Bay of Grey Waters. The Inquisitor had served the Church of the One Exodus for 20 years. He had started as a simple priest in a village parish. He lost his family in a raid by creatures from the other side, his wife and daughter. He found solace in the dogma. Death is sacred and final. The death of a wife is sacred. His daughter's death is sacred. Grief is sacred. And if someone can die and return, then they spit on that sacredness. They spit on the one thing that helped Moore not go mad with grief. Torin said this without emotion, like a report. Do-hyun listened and took notes. Moore was not a sadist. He was not a maniac. He was a man who had found in faith the only way to survive his loss, and now defended that faith as if it were his own life. Because without it, he had no reason to live. Do-hyun wrote it down. Valens Moore, a fanatic, but sincere. Motivation. Defense of his own means of survival. Weakness. Empathy. He understands pain. He is in pain himself. He will see my pain. Question. What will he do when he sees it? Torin told him more. Moore wasn't traveling alone. There were 5 with him. 2 assistant priests, 2 soldiers, and 1 hooded man whose face no one saw. 5. Not an army, a reconnaissance group. They traveled openly, stopped in villages. Moore preached. He spoke of the sanctity of death, of how immortality is not a gift, but a curse, and that whoever bears it suffers, and that suffering defiles the world. People listened. Some believed. Do-hyun thought that Moore wasn't entirely wrong. Immortality really is a curse. He really does suffer. The only difference was that Moore offered deliverance through destruction, while Do-hyun wanted to find deliverance through understanding. 2 paths to the same goal, to stop suffering. 10 days until Moore's arrival. Do-hyun made use of every one. On the 6th day after Torin's departure, an event occurred that changed the situation. A woman arrived in Thornford, on foot, alone. Her clothes were black and gray, simple, a symbol on her neck, a circle with a line pointing down, the symbol of the Church of the Single Exodus. She entered through the gate and asked where to find the heretic. Baron pointed to the barn. The woman approached, young, 26. Her face was stern. Her eyes were gray and attentive. Her back was straight. Her hands were folded in front of her. A priestess. She introduced herself. Sister Rebecca, sent ahead, reconnaissance. Moore had sent her ahead so she could assess the threat and prepare a report. Do-hyun asked why she was telling him this. Rebecca paused. Then she replied that she wanted to be honest, that lies defile the service, that she had come to judge him by his deeds, not by rumors. Do-hyun looked at her, stern, straightforward, honest. Dangerous precisely because of that honesty, because an honest enemy is unpredictable. He won't deceive, but he won't show mercy either. He suggested she stay in the village, to observe, to assess. Rebecca agreed. She stayed. For 3 days, Rebecca watched. She saw Yuna treating a child with a fever using an antidote formulated based on Do-hyun's data. She saw Kate training on the field, repeating the same movement over and over. She saw Maggie running through the village with a notebook, jotting down everything in sight. She saw Lily sitting by the stream over the crystals, muttering formulas. And she saw Do-hyun. She saw him walk out the gate in the morning and return sometimes an hour later, sometimes 5 minutes later. 5 minutes meant he had died nearby. She saw his hands, the tremor. She saw his eyes when he thought no one was watching, empty for a second, as if he were falling somewhere inside. Then he'd come back and get back to work. On the 3rd evening, Rebecca came to him. She said she wanted to ask a question. Do-hyun nodded. She asked if he was in pain. Do-hyun looked at her. He asked why she needed to know. She replied that her faith taught her that death is peace, final and sacred, that after death the pain ends, that it is mercy. And if he dies and returns, then that means peace has been taken from him. And she wants to know if that is true. Is it true that he is denied peace? Do-hyun was silent for a long time. Then he answered. He said that between death and return there is a moment, a fraction of a second. In that moment there is silence, complete, absolute silence. No pain, no fear, nothing. Only silence. And this is the only peace he knows. Half a second of peace for every agony. And every time, this peace is taken from him, and he is thrown back into a body that remembers everything. Rebecca listened. Her face didn't change, but her hands, which had been folded in front of her, unclenched. She asked again, "Why does he keep going? If every death is torture, why go through it again?" Do-hyun answered without hesitation. Because Yuna no longer loses patience to the swamp creature. Because Torin knows why his brother died. Because the village has gone a season without any dead. Because Kate holds a sword again without shame. Because Maggie falls asleep without fearing she'll be driven away tomorrow. He said that each of his deaths is someone's life, and that he can't stop. Not because he doesn't want to, because the faces of those he saved stand before his eyes just as clearly as the faces of those deaths he remembers. And there are more of the former. There are more of the former. Rebecca was silent for a minute. Then she stood up. She said she would write a report to Moru, an honest report, what she saw and what she heard. Do-hyun asked what she would write. Rebecca replied that she would write the truth, that before her stood not a heretic desecrating death. Before her stood a man denied peace, who used his own torment to bring peace to others. And that this was not heresy. It was a sacrifice. And the church must decide for itself what it wants, to destroy the sacrifice or to bless it. She left the next morning. Do-hyun stood at the gate and watched her go. Yuna stood beside him. She asked if Rebecca's report would help. Do-hyun replied that he didn't know. Moore might listen. He might not. A man in grief is unpredictable. But now they have something they didn't have before. A witness inside the church. This isn't an ally, it's a crack in the wall. A small one, but cracks are his specialty. 5 days until more. Do-hyun stood before the circle and laid out a plan. Not a battle plan, a conversation plan. Moore isn't some creature from the ravine. He cannot be understood through death. You have to talk to him. But first, you have to show him. Do-hyun spent 3 days preparing the village. Not for defense, for a demonstration. He asked Baden to gather the people. Everyone who had been saved by his knowledge. The mother whose child survived thanks to Yuna's antidote. The family that crossed Howling Ravine using his route and cut 2 days off their journey to Copper Outpost. The old man who, for the first time in 10 years, stepped outside the fence on a day of westerly wind because the ointment worked. People. Living people. Proof. Lily had been working on the artifact. She hadn't had time to create a fully functional dead zone generator, but she had made something else. A small crystal that recorded Do-hyun's anti-magic pulse. She could play back the recording, show any mage what happens when he dies. Visually, irrefutably, a scientific fact. Kate had been training. Her signature jab had become faster, cleaner, more precise. She killed another jumper, the second one this month, with a single strike. Without Do-hyun's help. On her own, using his data but her own hand. Maggie finished the map. Not just the village. She drew a map of the surrounding area within a 2-league radius. Roads, trails, water sources, dangerous zones, safe passages. Everything Do-hyun had learned in 2 months. All on a single sheet. A map of knowledge. A map of lives saved by the deaths of a single person. Torin brought the latest news. Moore had stopped at Copper Outpost, a day's journey away. He'd be here tomorrow. The night before Moore's arrival, Do-hyun didn't sleep. He sat by the fire in the square and reread his notebook. 22 deaths. Each one recorded, each with a conclusion, each turned into someone's salvation. Hanyul approached him. He hadn't seen her before. She had come to the village 3 days ago, quietly, unnoticed, like a shadow appearing. A young woman of 23, clothing of the northern clan, weathered skin, dark, deep eyes. The eyes of someone who has seen something they cannot remember. She sat down beside him, silently. Do-hyun looked at her. She was staring at the fire. Then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, steady, emotionless. She said her name was Hanyul, that she was from the northern clan of the Grey Horn, that 2 years ago her squad of 12 trackers had entered the zone around the Rift of Silence, and that she was the only one who returned. They found her unconscious a league from the rift. She remembered nothing, not how she entered, not what she saw, not how she got out, not what happened to the other 11. A void, a hole in her memory. For 2 years she tried to remember. She couldn't. For 2 years she lived with the feeling that she had abandoned her own, that she had survived while they perished, that she had betrayed them in the most despicable way, by forgetting. She heard about a man who dies and returns, who gathers knowledge about what kills, and she came, because he is the only one who can go to the rift and come back, the only one who can find out what happened to her squad, the only one who can restore her memory, or at least the truth. Do-hyun listened. Then he said he would go. Not now, but he would go. He promised. Hanyul looked at him. There was no hope in her eyes. Hope had died long ago. But there was something else. Recognition. She said he smelled of silence. Do-hyun froze. She said that when she was unconscious at the rift, she had sensed a smell. Not a smell, an absence of smell, a void. And he smelled the same, as if a part of him had been there, or a part from there had been inside him. Do-hyun thought of the stone around his neck, of the silence between deaths, of the presence that recognized him. Two people marked by the rift. They sat by the fire and were silent, and the silence was the same as the stillness. Morning. Moore arrived at dawn, 5 on horseback. He himself rode in front, tall, thin, his face narrow and pale, sunken eyes. The eyes of a man who hasn't truly slept in a long time. A black cloak, the silver symbol of the church on his chest. He dismounted at the gate. He looked at the village. He looked at the people who had come out to meet him. His gaze found Do-hyun immediately, as if he knew where to look. Moore approached, stopped 3 paces away, looked. Do-hyun looked back. Moore spoke. His voice was quiet and steady, without threat, without malice. He said that Rebecca had written to him, that he had read it, and that he disagreed. He said he saw before him a man who was suffering, and that suffering did not justify heresy. That there was peace awaiting everyone beyond the final boundary, sacred and well-deserved. And that Do-hyun rejects that peace every time he returns, and that it destroys not only him, but also the order of the world. Do-hyun listened. Then he replied. He said that Moore was right, that he was suffering, that peace existed. He had felt it, that split second between death and return. Silence, peace, the absence of pain. He knows what it's like, and every time he's torn back. Moore listened. His face didn't change, but something stirred in his eyes. Do-hyun continued. He said he hadn't chosen this. He hadn't asked for it. He hadn't wanted it. He'd been cast into a world where everything kills, and they gave him a tool. One. To die and return. Not to live forever. To record exactly how you were killed, and to pass that record on to those who die once, forever, with no return. He asked Moore if he could die in place of Moore's wife, die 100 times, and on the 101st time, return with a recipe for how to kill the creature that took her. Would he do it? Moore turned pale, his hands clenched. He said it was a low blow. Do-hyun replied that it wasn't a blow, it was a question, a simple engineering question. If a tool saves lives, is it heresy to use it? Moore was silent for a long time. Then he said he needed time, that he hadn't come to kill, that he had come to judge, and judgment requires evidence. Do-hyun suggested he stay, to watch, like Rebecca. Moore agreed. Not right away, but he agreed. Moore watched for 3 days. He walked through the village, talked to people, watched. He saw a mother who showed him her child and said the boy would be dead without the antidote. He saw Torin, who told him about his brother and the ravine's layout. He saw Maggie's map. He saw Kate at practice. He saw Yuna at work. And he saw Do-hyun. On the second day, Moore was standing by the gate when Do-hyun was heading out beyond the fence. Moore asked where he was going. Do-hyun replied that he was checking the perimeter. A new jumper on the old territory. Need to figure out his behavior. Moore asked what would happen if the jumper killed him. Do-hyun replied that he would return. Moore asked if he could go with him. Do-hyun looked at him. Then he nodded. They walked in silence. Do-hyun in front, Moore 10 paces behind. At the 125th step from the edge of the woods, Do-hyun stopped. The jumper had been here. He had heard a rustle. Moore heard it too. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword. Do-hyun told him not to move. Stand still. Don't make a sound. The jumper attacks movement and sound. If Moore stands quietly, the creature will ignore him. Do-hyun took a step forward. The jumper emerged from the bushes. A new one. Larger than the first. 8 eyes instead of 6. A subspecies. Or a mutation. Do-hyun noted it in his mind. He stood and watched. The jumper looked at him. Half a second of silence. The creature leaped. Do-hyun didn't dodge. He stood and watched. Trajectory, angle, speed, all new. Everything needs to be recorded. Claws sank into his chest. Pain. Familiar. 23. Darkness. Silence. A presence. It was closer. A voice, not a word, but almost a word. A shape, an outline, as if someone were trying to speak through a wall of cotton wool. Cold. A barn. Night. He had returned. Moore saw him die. Moore stood 10 paces away and watched as the man allowed himself to be killed. Calmly, without a scream, with an expression Moore had seen only on the faces of martyrs in frescoes. Not pain, not fear. Concentration. In the morning, Do-hyun went out to the square. Moore was already there. He was standing by the fire, pale. He looked at Do-hyun as if seeing him for the first time. He said he saw the creature tear open his chest, that he saw blood, that he saw him fall. That after that the creature ran away and Moore stood over his body as it grew cold. And then the body vanished. It simply dissolved, like mist. Moore said he had prayed all night. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't know what to pray for. Before, he had prayed for peace. Now he didn't know. Because the man in front of him could not find peace. Peace lasts half a second, and then it is taken away. And this man doesn't complain, doesn't curse. He writes it down and moves on. Moore fell silent. Then he asked. He asked how many times. Do-hyun answered. 23. Moore closed his eyes. 23 deaths. 23 agonies. And the man stands before him, talking, and only his hands are trembling. Moore opened his eyes and said he couldn't destroy him, that he cannot force peace upon him because peace forced upon someone is not mercy, but murder. But he cannot approve of it either. The church will not accept it. He said he would leave, that he would write a report, that he would recommend the church leave Do-hyun alone. Not because Do-hyun is right, because to punish someone who has already been punished endlessly is cruelty unworthy of faith. Rebecca stood nearby. She listened. When Moore fell silent, she said she would stay. Moore looked at her. She said that someone had to pray for this man, because he wouldn't do it himself. Moore looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. Moore left that same day. The 5 of them mounted their horses and rode out through the gate. As a farewell, Moore turned and looked at Do-hyun. He said he had seen many heretics, madmen, impostors, people who spat on death out of pride or greed. Do-hyun is not one of them. Do-hyun does not spit on death. He drowns in it every day. And every day he surfaces, and every day he dives back in for the sake of strangers. This is not heresy. It is something for which the church has no word. He left. The village exhaled. Do-hyun stood at the gate and watched them go. Yuna approached. She stood beside him. He said that one threat had been removed. Yuna replied that the crown remained. Du-hyun nodded. A week passed. He never gave the crown an answer. Graves will send someone, or he'll come himself. And unlike Mora, Graves doesn't believe. Graves calculates. Rebecca stayed in the village. She took a small room in Baron's house. Every morning she prayed, quietly, briefly. Du-hyun didn't know what for. But one day Maggie overheard and told him. Rebecca wasn't praying for the repose of a soul. She was praying that one day Du-hyun would be able to die in peace. Just once. For real. Forever. And that it would be his choice, not someone else's verdict. Du-hyun heard this and was silent for a long time. Then he wrote it down in his notebook. Not in the creatures section, not in the data section. On the last page, where he hadn't written anything until then. He wrote a single line. A goal. To put down the notebook one day. Just to live. Once. For real. Then he closed the notebook and went to work. A year passed. Thornford had changed. No longer a village on the brink of ruin, but an outpost of knowledge. Do-hyun's notebook had turned into 7 notebooks. Maggie transcribed them neatly and made copies. The copies went with merchants to Copper Outpost and beyond. Maps of safe routes, descriptions of creatures, antidote recipes, diagrams of traps. Knowledge that sold for more than enchanted weapons. Because an enchanted sword saves one person. Knowledge saves everyone who reads it. Yuna became the best healer in the province, not because she was more talented than others, because she had data that no one else had. Every disease, every poison, every wound, described in minute detail. Every treatment protocol tested on the only patient who could die and tell the tale. She kept her own journal, a parallel to Do-hyun's notebook. His entries were engineering reports. Her entries were medical records. Together, they formed the first systematic catalog of threats and rescue methods in Ayrton's history. Kate became a master of the single strike. Her upward thrust from a low stance was faster than a jumper's throw. She killed 12 creatures in a year, each using Du-hyun's method, each with a single strike. The Adventurers Guild. Adventurers Guild sent her an offer to restore her rank. She refused. She didn't need a rank. She had a place. Lily had made a breakthrough. She had created an artifact that reproduced an anti-magic pulse. Weak, for 3 seconds, within a 2-step radius. But it worked. 3 seconds of a dead zone on demand. 3 seconds in which the enemy's magic ceased to exist. It was a weapon. Small and imperfect, but the world's first anti-magic generator. Lily named it Pulse. Maggie had grown up. Not physically, internally. She had become a cartographer, the best in the province. Her maps were accurate, detailed, and beautiful. She drew not just routes, but worlds. Each map was a work of art you wanted to gaze at, and every map saved lives. Du-hyun taught her not to die. He taught her to see and to record, and she became his eyes where he could not go without dying. Rebecca became a bridge between the circle and the world, between Du-hyun and the church. She wrote to Moore, regularly, honestly. Moore didn't reply. But he didn't send new inquisitors either. Silence from the church. Not approval. Not persecution. A pause. Rebecca believed that the pause was the beginning of understanding. Hanyul became Du-hyun's shadow. She walked with him, silently. She did not join the fight. She observed, watched his back, and waited. waited for him to go to the rift because he had promised. The crown sent a second proposal. Do-hyun refused again, this time without politeness. He replied through a merchant. He conveyed a single phrase. He is not a resource. He is a person. And if the crown wants information about the rift, let it stop sending officials and send those who need help. Not gold for his body, help, equipment, maps, guides, and a guarantee that his circle would be safe while he was inside. The crown was silent for a month. Then it sent equipment. No strings attached, no contract, just a crate of weapons, armor, and provisions. And a note. One word. Agreed. Do-hyun knew this wasn't generosity. It was calculation. The crown had decided it was cheaper to give him what he wanted than to lose the only person capable of entering the rift. But calculation can be used. He was preparing. 124 deaths in a year, each one recorded, each one inside. 124 layers of pain. The tremor in his hands became constant. Yuna made him a decoction every evening. It didn't help, but she made it, because it was the only thing she could give him besides her hands, which sometimes at night would rest on his trembling palms and hold them until the tremors subsided. They didn't talk about it. They didn't name it. But everyone saw, and everyone was silent. Because in a world where a person dies every day for your safety, you don't ask questions about who is holding his hand at night. At dawn, on the last day before the trek to the rift, Do-hyun gathered the circle. Yuna, Kate, Lily, Maggie, Hanyul, Rebecca, Torin. He spread out the map. The route to the Rift of Silence. 12 days' journey north. He said he would go. Not alone. The whole circle. Except Maggie. Maggie jumped up, her face flushed. She wanted to scream. Do-hyun looked at her. She fell silent. He said she would stay in Thornford, that she would keep copies of the notebooks, that if he didn't return, she would take them to Kronheim and give them to the guild, that his knowledge must not die with him, that this was more important than any expedition. Maggie stood there trembling, not out of anger, out of fear, that very fear of being abandoned. Do-hyun walked over to her. He placed his hand on her head, a heavy, trembling hand. He said he would return. Maggie looked up at him. She didn't believe him. But this time it wasn't because she didn't trust him, because she knew where he was going. He'll come back. He always comes back. The question is, how? They set out the next morning, 7 of them. Do-hyun in front, the fault stone around his neck, a notebook in his bag. Behind him, Yuna with a first aid kit, Kate with a sword, Lily with crystals, Hanyul with a bow, Rebecca with a prayer, Torin with an axe. Maggie stood at the gate. She wasn't crying. She held a stack of notebooks in her hands, pressed them to her chest, like a shield. 12 days' journey. Every day, Do-hyun went ahead alone. He checked the road. He died if necessary. He returned to the stone he carried with him. Every death is data. Every piece of data is safety for those who followed him. Death number 125. A trap on the trail. A hidden pit with spikes. Death number 126. A creature in the fog. A new species. 4 legs, spikes on its tail. Paralyzing venom. Takes effect in 40 seconds, faster than a swamp creature. Death number 127. The same creature, second attempt. Weak spot, neck beneath the crest. On the 12th day, they reached the fault zone. Do-hyun sensed it before he saw it. The stone around his neck grew hot. Silence inside his head. That very one. Alive. Attentive. The rift of silence looked like a wound in the earth, a crack 20 paces wide, as long as the horizon. No light came from it, no sound. Nothing came. It absorbed. The light dimmed beside it. Sounds faded. The grass around it was dead, white, like paper. Hanyul stood next to Du-hyun. She looked at the crack. Her hands were trembling. She said she recognized this place. She doesn't remember what was here, but her body remembers. Du-hyun took out his notebook. He looked at the circle. 6 faces: fear, determination, trust. He said he would go in alone, that they would stay here, that the stone would stay with them. If he died inside, he would return to the stone. He would tell them what he saw, and he would go again, as many times as necessary. Yuna said no. Du-hyun looked at her. She said she would go with him, to the edge, not inside, to the point where he could still return on foot. She would wait, every time, no matter how many times it took. Du-hyun wanted to refuse. He looked into her eyes. He couldn't. He nodded. Yuna took his hand, his right one, the trembling one. She squeezed it. They entered the dead zone together. Lily was right. Mana was disappearing. Kate said it felt like the warmth had been sucked out of her. Lily turned pale. Her artifacts stopped working. The crystals went dark. The dead zone, Rebecca prayed, quietly, unceasingly. Du-hyun felt nothing. For him, nothing had changed. He has no mana that can be taken away. He was a 0. And in the dead zone, a 0 was the only one who remained himself. He reached the edge of the crack. He looked down. Darkness. Not ordinary. Absolute. Bottomless. Wall-less. Nothing at all. And from that darkness, silence stared back at him. He took the stone from around his neck. He gave it to Yuna. She took it. Her hands were cold. He said 2 words. He said, "Wait for me." Yuna clutched the stone. She nodded. Du-hyun jumped. The fall lasted 3 seconds, then the impact, then darkness, then silence. But not that silence, a different one, deeper, wider. He stood in it. He wasn't lying down, he was standing, alive, inside the rift. There was nothing around him, empty space with no walls, no ceiling, and no floor. He was standing on something solid but couldn't see what it was. And before him were tracks, scratches on the invisible floor, as if someone had walked here before him, for a long time, for years, thousands of steps. He followed the tracks. After 10 steps, he found a notebook, old, worn, a leather cover that crumbled at the touch, the pages yellow and brittle. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the notes were familiar. Creature, type of attack, weak spot, way around it. Someone had kept the same kind of notes, here, inside the rift. Another immortal, the one who came before him. Du-hyun flipped through the pages. The last entries were different, not about creatures, about silence. The author wrote that silence speaks, that it is not hostile, that it is lonely, that the rift is not a crack, but a door, and behind the door is not the other side. Behind the door is the void that existed before the world, and in that void, the one who opened the door was trapped. He could not leave. He could not die. He was calling for someone. Someone who looks at death not with horror, but with a notebook. The last page. A single line. The one reading this. "I've been waiting for you. Close the door and take my peace." I couldn't leave. Help me leave. Do-hyun stood in the silence, holding a stranger's notebook. Someone else's pain. Thousands of deaths, thousands of years. A man who was stuck here and couldn't truly die. An eternal echo. A voice, that very one, from the silence between deaths. Do-hyun raised his head. He knew what had to be done. Not now, not today, but he knew. Close the door. Give peace to the one who waits. Understand the mechanism. Find the weak spot, the point of failure. As always, as with every creature, as with every death, as with every problem the world threw at him. Break it down into pieces. Study it. Solve it. He died inside the rift a minute after that. Something in the darkness killed him. Quickly, painlessly, as if the silence itself had extinguished him for a moment. Death number 128. The quietest one. He opened his eyes. Yuna was sitting next to him. She was holding a stone pressed against her chest. Her face was wet. She was waiting, not knowing if he would return, not knowing if he was alive. Just waiting. He sat up, looked at her, said 2 words, said, "I'm back." Yuna exhaled, long and ragged. Then she slapped him on the shoulder. Then she hugged him, tightly, silently. He hugged her back. His hands were shaking. 128 deaths, each one inside him, each one forever. But for the first time in all those deaths, he knew the answer. He knew what was in the rift, knew who was calling him, knew his purpose. Close the door. Give rest to the immortal trapped in eternity. And maybe find peace for himself. He pulled away from Yuna. He looked at the circle. 6 faces. Hanyul was looking at him, and in her eyes was something that hadn't been there for 2 years. Memory. She remembered. She had seen the rift from the inside. She had seen the silence. She had seen the one who was trapped, and she had seen Do-hyun before he ended up here. The rift had shown her the future, or the past, or something else entirely. She opened her mouth. She said 1 sentence. She said she had seen him there, before he came to this world. Do-hyun looked at her. He nodded. He knew. The silence recognized him because it had been waiting for him from the very beginning. His transfer, his gift, his endless deaths, all for one purpose: to get here, to read someone else's notebook, and to close the door that someone had opened 1,000 years ago. He stood up, took out his notebook, opened the last page. Under the line about the goal of simply living one day, he wrote another. But first, close the door. He closed the notebook. He looked north, at the crack in the ground, at the world's wound. Then he turned to his circle, to Yuna with her warm hands, to Kate with her one perfect strike, to Lily with her crazy theories and burning eyes, to Hanyul with her restored memory, to Rebecca with her prayer for someone else's peace. Somewhere in Thornford, Maggie was holding a stack of notebooks and waiting. Do-hyun smiled. For real. For the first time in 128 deaths. Not almost. For real. He said 1 sentence. He said, "Let's go home. There's work to be done."